Welcome to the FNO InsureTech podcast, a place where movers and shakers from all points within the insurance ecosystem gather and discuss all things InsureTech. We talk about how technology and innovation are affecting and driving change in the industry. Here are your hosts, Matt D. Fothery, Lee Boyd, and Rob Beller.
Hey, podcast world. Welcome to another unbelievable edition of FNO InsureTech. I am looking at my co-host right now, the one and only
Lee Boyd.
That's right. Coming
And I'm
to
looking back at Rob,
the one and only.
the one and only Rob.
So many people are grateful for that.
Yeah. Where are you today, Rob?
I am in my office, my home office. I'm hunkered down. I'm sheltered in place, more or less.
Y'all are still doing that?
I'm in Sacramento, California.
Is it cold?
It is cold, which is why you can see I have a down jacket on
Mhm.
because it's cold and I'm too cheap to turn my heat up as high as I need to do it. So,
Well, that's silly.
I live in California. Everything's more expensive here. Did you know that?
I did. What about an air conditioner?
More
Are there air
expensive.
conditioners there?
Yes, there's air conditioners. We have one, and it's more expensive.
I'm sorry to
You
hear
know
that,
how
Rob.
in Texas that everybody runs their air conditioner at like 68 degrees.
Yeah.
If I
that's
ran
true.
my air conditioner at 68 degrees, I'd have a $2,000 electric bill. So
That's
I don't do
excessive.
that.
I would not.
Yeah.
I would roll a window down,
No.
or I guess push a window up, depending on your type of window.
Or out.
Out, maybe. Yeah, maybe it's a
Mhm.
throw it out type of window.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Maybe you remove the cardboard box from it. I don't know what you got.
Maybe, or maybe you just break the window.
Maybe you do. Well, I'm in Waco.
All
and
of these
it's a
things,
beautiful
all of
day.
these things might lead to a claim.
Yeah, if someone broke your window,
Mhm.
that could be a claim, and it could be a certain type of person who gets that claim. Maybe somebody who's certified in Windows, perhaps, or certified for a carrier. Maybe there's a state license involved.
Maybe it was installed improperly.
Maybe installed improperly, and maybe there's a tool out there that would help the insurance company quickly and accurately get that claim to the right person.
What a funny coincidence, Lee.
Why? Why do you say
Because
that,
that's
Rob?
exactly what we're going to be talking about today.
No.
How do
We
these
are?
things happen? How does it happen
I don't
that every
know.
week when we do an introduction, it circles around to what we're talking about?
That's insane. That's
You would
insane.
almost think it's intentional.
Almost.
Almost.
Well, who are we talking to today, Rob?
We're talking to Tim Christ, who is the VP of Growth at Claimatic.
That's
You know
a
what
cool
Claimatic
job.
is?
I do. I just so happen to know Claimatic. And you know what? It kind of does exactly what I was just saying. It assists in making the right decision at dispatch. I'm excited to talk to him today. I think it's a neat product that's out there to help save carriers a lot of money, which in turn can save policyholders more money by making the right decision at dispatch and getting their claim in the hands of the right person.
We know as adjusters that a tremendous amount of our claims operation dollars goes into not only trying to choose the right person, but dealing with the fallout of not having the right person. Isn't that right, Lee?
Oh, it's huge. If you make the wrong decision at dispatch, I mean, it can cost a lot of money. It can cost a lot of time. Customer service can be down. You have to do it correctly, because if you don't, you're gonna find yourself spending a lot of time fixing that error.
Even legal headaches.
Oh, legal, absolutely, compliance, all things that if you don't have it set correctly, you will pay for it at the end.
Right. So getting it right would be an understatement. So we thought we'd have Tim on and talk about what their product is, what their InsureTech tool is, because after all, you know what, Lee?
We're an InsureTech podcast.
We're an InsureTech podcast.
I heard that somewhere. Shocker.
Yeah. Anyways, rather than listening to us jibber jabber, why don't we just get right to us jibber jabbering with Tim Christ, the VP of Growth from Claimatic. Hey, everybody, we are here with our guest. We have a guest from the claims side of the world where we're always the most comfortable talking about. So this is going to be a really tough interview.
Very hard.
We're tough interviewers, for God's sake. Anyways, we have with us today Tim Christ, the VP of Growth at Claimatic. How you doing, Tim?
I'm wonderful, guys. Thank y'all for having me on.
Yeah, we're glad for you to be on today.
Where are you joining us from in this world of ours?
San Antonio.
They've had a few things happen in San Antonio, even before it was San Antonio, right?
Yeah.
The biggest being, I'm going to let you
The
say
Alamo.
it, the Alamo. Tim, are you a San Antonio guy?
No, I've lived here since 2006, but I mean, I grew up in Texas. And so, yeah, we came to the Alamo when I was a kid. And if you want to talk about that, I've got an interesting story about the Alamo in Mexico City.
Do you really?
Yeah, that's
Well, let's start there. Go ahead. It's interesting. If it's not, we'll just edit it out. So no pressure.
Yeah.
No, it's funny. You know, I grew up on a farm and we were lower middle class, so we didn't get to travel much. But when I started to get the opportunity to travel internationally to do some claims work, I was down in Mexico City a lot. And, you know, every now and again, we actually get the opportunity to look around a little bit. And so a friend of mine down there took me to the Castillo de Chapultepec, which is a museum now in Mexico City. And it's where Maximilian lived when Napoleon sent him over to conduct the Spanish War. And you go in there, and of course, it's all just Mexican history. But, you know, of course, Lee and I are Texans, but you go to the Alamo, and we all know the story of the Alamo really, really well. Well, in Mexico, there's these three big walls in the museum that talk about the Battle of the Alamo. And basically, from their perspective, it says, you know, it was a grand victory. We slaughtered all the Texans, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And then you go around the corner, and there's a little bitty plaque on the other wall that says the Battle of San Jacinto, and it basically says we lost.
Oh, wow.
So I just you just find it really, really interesting that, you know, the way that people interpret and write history is just a little bit different. So it was just fun to be able to know that story from both sides now.
I've always been fascinated in history because I read a lot from, you know, American perspective, but I always wonder what is written, you know, in different perspectives. Like over in England, what do they teach about the American Revolution? And I came to find out they don't really teach it, is what I was told. And so it's very interesting to always see the other side of things.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's amazing. And I think, you know, I thought when I was in school that history was the most boring subject ever. But once you start traveling and you actually, especially globally, and you have to interact with a different culture and you speak a different language and all these other things, you actually learn that history is really, really important.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, how they interpret the world and how they view things and how they interact with you is all based on that. And so the better you know their history, the better you can interact with them. And so then, because now you're living it, it becomes fascinating. And so we were down, I mean, there's buildings in Mexico City that are, you know, 600 and 700 and 800 years old. And, you know, of course, you've got the Aztecs and the Mayans before that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then, you know, eating some food that's Mayan in influence and the Mayan spices they use. And so all of those things just blend together. And so just you gain a whole another level of appreciation for history that maybe you don't have when you're 16 or 17 years old and trying to read it from a textbook.
Well, speaking of history, let's talk about Claimatic.
We'll just jump right in there, right?
You are the
Thank you for
VP
that,
of
by the
Growth
way.
at Claimatic. Let's start by letting you take a minute or two and tell us what that is and what Claimatic does.
Sure, I appreciate that. Well, it'll be Rob's job to keep us from going down a long tangent, right?
Yeah.
If anyone never goes off the tracks, it's me. So please don't you worry.
Claimatic was actually sort of born by accident. So in 2006, a company called IAS Claim Service, which is actually based here in San Antonio as well, was bought by a private investor, a guy named Larry Cochran. And as he started to build out the practice and make it larger, they encountered some technological challenges. And so they looked around the market and they said, well, what claims management platform can we use internally that will satisfy our needs? And obviously from an IA firm, just like you guys, you're well aware of the issues that you arise with. So you've got a whole bank of, 1099 guys and some, full-time guys that you have to manage on a daily basis. And then from the carrier side, you've got to ingest a number of claims a lot of times very, very quickly from a CAT perspective. And so they didn't find anything that existed on the market. And so essentially they built their own CMS, their own claims management system end to end that managed the IA firm. And as they were, as that got developed and were, having a couple of beers with some friendly, competitors, Pace Service was giving them a discussion about, man, we've got all these same challenges. They said, well, what'd you do to solve it? And they said, well, we built our own darn system. And so Pace Service said, really? Well, can we have it? And so, figured out how to set up another instance and spin it off and set it up for Pacesetter as well. And then along the way, they had developed a kind of a cool little claim auto assignment tool where it automatically took all the FNOL data, matched it to an adjuster, and sent it along the way without any human interaction or any administrative oversight. And so they were showing that, of course, as IAs do, they took it to their carriers to say, hey, let us show you how we do your work, faster, better, cheaper than our competition. And they showed them the tool. And so the first carrier client said, I really like that auto assignment piece. Can I have it? So then it was like, oh, well, shoot, okay, maybe we've got something that's commercially viable here. So Claimatic was spun out as its own company in 2015 and has then continued the software development process with carrier involvement and iteration as it happens, of course, over time. And so now we're on version 2.5. I've got several carrier clients, a couple that you guys will hear about here in the upcoming month or two. And yeah, really looking to just expand our network in the carrier space and help them process claims faster, lower LAE, improve operational efficiency, and overall improve customer experience as well, because obviously the faster that you can manage claims, the better outcomes you can have.
So is it mostly a tool for carriers, or is it also for IA companies or even water mitigation companies? Who is your main customer?
Yeah, I mean, there's application across the spectrum, but our real focus is to help the carriers specifically to drive their efficiencies in their process. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about an intelligent decisioning tool, that when you've got a lot of projects on one side and a lot of resources on the other, whether they're staff resources or outside third-party vendor resources, and the idea that you can match and combine those things and multi-assign, automatically. And as you guys know, and obviously as this podcast is borne out, it's amazing these days. I mean, for us that have been in the business for 20 years now, 15 or 20 years ago, there was a couple of dozen solutions that you could use to manage claims. Well, now the same claim could be managed with 7 or 8 or 9 different vendors doing a small sliver of the process.
Right.
And so the expansion of how to manage all of that complexity has just exploded, and nobody's really figured out the secret sauce yet. We believe that when you've got sort of that intelligent brain that sits on top of the claims management system to actually help filter and manage all that in parallel. And so that's really kind of what we like to believe that our solution helps to solve for.
One of the issues when assigning claims is multiple systems. You have to be in lots of systems, it seems like, to find your resources, find the claim, find the information about the claim, everything like that. Does this help us have just one system to get the job done? Is it integrated with other systems?
It is, yeah. So we're a SaaS platform, and we've got an API, a series of API connections. And so the deal for us is we sit on top of a traditional claims management system, whether it's a Guidewire, Duck Creek, Salesforce, or homegrown system. And basically, we'll consume the data from FNOL. We'll consume the data from the adjuster licensing and compliance group. We'll, consume the data from, possibly from vendor management. We'll consume essentially whatever kind of data they want that we want to develop into the logical claim assignment decisioning piece, and then push it back, whether we push it back into the claims management system to then further, downstream, like interact with Symbility or Xactimate, or if they say, hey, we'll send it back to our claims management system, but also ping XYZ resource. Obviously, with the API connection, that's easy to be done. So obviously, at the end of the day, you got to have a system of record that tracks all of that stuff. So most of the time, it's tracked in that CMS, but we have the ability to build the workflow out however the carrier would like.
So what kind of stats have you found in this? Is there real time savings? Is there real dollars to be saved in this? Or is it just a more convenient feature for people who are getting claims out?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I'll share we had a client call on Friday, and Rob, as you're well aware, you guys have had some pretty good storms over there in California in the last couple of weeks. They've had several hundred claims come through their system. And so, of course, with Claimatic, they're seeing all this come through in real time, and it's just auto assigning. So you're not actually doing anything. You're just kind of watching the process flow. But they had about 100 claims that came in that were fence only. And so they said, well, man, we can triage that to our virtual team instead of, automatically kicking it out to our IA firm. So they updated their rules on the fly and batched all those claims and pushed them over to the virtual team. And so their comment on Friday was, we saved about $25,000 in LAE just from being able to grab those in real time, push them over, and manage them a little differently. So, obviously $25,000 in the grand scheme of things is not a huge issue, but for a small change on one morning, that the opportunity is pretty exponential. But to your earlier question about, as far as the metrics that we see, historically what you find in the industry, and if it's over a weekend, I mean, there might actually be 2 or 3 or 4 days between the date that the claim is received and the date the adjuster actually first makes contact. So we condense that process from days down to seconds. And so typically our adjusters are assigned in 12, 15, 20 seconds. And so it just allows for a faster response rate. So you're speeding up time to contact by, typically a day to 3. We also, if you're talking about a large, CAT deployment or property field adjustment management project, we can dynamically manage the barriers and the polygons and the area by which they service, and so we can cut down windshield time pretty significantly, and typically allow the field guys to close another 1 to 1.3 claims per day, which also then translates to about a 22% savings in LAE because they obviously not having as much windshield time. And then the flow through is we found customers and carriers have told us that policy churn typically goes down about 14% because when you think about it, anytime a claim happens, that it's about a 50-50 chance of that person staying a client or moving to another carrier at renewal. So we found about a 14% decrease in churn, found about a 15% increase in NPS scores, which obviously correlates and makes sense. But yeah, we found some pretty significant metrics that help a carrier do better.
You're kind of talking about magic here. Tell me how you guys do that. I mean, you don't have to give me the algorithm, but what does your system do to do that?
It's just got all the data already available, right? And it's already got the decision trees built. So when you think about it, let's say we have Hurricane Harvey that comes through Houston. And so we've got some wind claims, we've got some flood claims, and we've got, obviously a number of different, sizes of exposure. And so what you think about from an adjusting perspective is we've got 1,000 claims we've got to deploy to the field. Well, they've got to have the appropriate license, right? So they've got to be licensed in Texas. That's number one. Are they flood certified? Are they wind certified? That's another, exclusionary criteria. If they don't have that, then they're not even eligible to receive that claim. If their estimating authority is only, say, 25,000 or 50,000 or 100,000, and there's a claim larger than that, well, that's another exclusionary criteria. And so, when you think about it, you can go through about a dozen questions that say, if this, then happens. And so we've simply built that out logically with carriers based on however, detailed they want to get. So you could have 12 decision criteria, you could have 150 decision criteria. It's really completely up to you, but it's already built into the software platform. So when a new claim hits it, the data that you receive at FNOL is for the most part the same across the entire carrier. It's typically 5 to 9 data elements. And so based on those data elements, you've already got all the resource data built into your system. The software simply runs in the background to make the match. And so it also pulls into account things like, what's their capacity? I mean, obviously, if a guy's already got 150 open files, we don't want to give him 10 or 20 more. It also looks at schedule. So if a guy's going to be on PTO, later this week, obviously, we don't want to assign him any new claims. And so when you just think through the logical progression of what the triage and assignment team do today from a very manual perspective inside a carrier, we've simply automated that whole process.
So your go-to-market is what with Claimatic?
Our go-to-market is to approach, the tier 1, 2, and 3 size carriers, that anybody that's got, 10,000, 15,000 claims a year or more, understand what their current process looks like today. I mean, obviously some of the top 10 guys have already done some form of automation in this, but
Sure.
typically it's it's funny, we'll talk about, stories. So I remember 20 years ago when I was doing work for State Farm and we were on their fire list as a forensic engineer, and, we would get every 8th claim, because they said, hey, we do round robin claim assignment because that way it's impartial and that's just the way our system works. And fast forward to today and you talk to other people, talk to people about how their claims management system, manages that automation or that assignment process, and it's still round robin 20 years later. So we still fundamentally really haven't done anything in that space. But when you think about it from a claims management perspective, your big issue on a daily basis is demand and capacity management. And so the better that you can manage your resources, which is, your adjusting teams and then your outside vendors, the better you manage those, the better everything else happens. And so you maintain a better reserve versus surplus allocation. You're better able to manage your overall reserve pool. You're better able to manage the staff in the field. You're better able to make decisions on the fly. But the problem is if you don't have visibility into that process, then you're sort of playing catch up, or you're running reports at weekend or month end and trying to make adjustments. But now you're already 30 days down the road. And so if we can make decisions in real time that affect claims that are happening right now today, and the ones that come in tomorrow, then it really is a bit of a game changer from a carrier's perspective. Because you look at people like Lemonade, where it's a straight algorithm. They they get at a new claim, and as long as it meets certain criteria, it's automatically paid. No adjuster even touches it. Simply, they built their logic in a form or fashion where the whole thing happens in 3 seconds. And so you hear a lot about straight through processing these days in the carrier space, and that's the holy grail, right? Because we
Right.
know that we've got a 12 to 15% loss adjustment expense cost per claim on average. And so if we can compress that, well, then all of a sudden that gives us opportunity to either, we could provide more coverage, or we could, increase margins, or we could, increase advertising spend, or do any one of a number of things. But, I always talk about, and I talk about in my book, that, claims is a zero sum game. We already know what our combined loss ratio number has got to be. And we've got to manage our indemnity dollars and our LAE to meet that number.
So is that straight through processing? Is that something that y'all are actively working on today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you see it in parts of it. So when you think about, if a new loss comes into FNOL, it gets assigned by, it gets triaged and assigned by Claimatic, and then it gets kicked into the CMS and says, hey, this automatically needs to go to like a CCC because it's a total loss claim. We just need to, get lien release, salvage, title, et cetera, and pay the insured. I mean, that can be very easily processed. But when you talk about straight through processing, again, while it's the holy grail of claims processing, it's really in its infancy. I mean, even the large carriers are only processing maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of their total claims volume through a straight through processing mechanism.
Yeah.
So there's still a huge opportunity to expand that. But, when you think about what really goes on in today's world, I mean, even like with work comp claims, I mean, there's still times where you don't even get the FNOL for a week or 2 or 3 or 4. And God forbid if somebody's already gotten, on some pain medications and then develops an addiction, had you known all those issues, or had you gotten that claim earlier, had you been able to assign it faster, you could have interrupted a lot of that cycle. And so there's just so much money that can be saved by faster intervention in the claims process. But we're still in, we're on the first hole of a 72 hole match.
Yeah.
And so there's a long road to go. But yeah, we absolutely see the future of that. And when you think of, and part of what we talk about with our system is, if I can incorporate churn data and NPS scores and variance from initial reserve to final payment, and if I can incorporate all that extra data that comes in on the backside and ingratiate that into my decisioning engine, and through some AI and ML tools, make my own assignment process smarter and faster and cheaper, well, then that speeds up everything downstream the second and third and fourth time around, right? So it just gets better and better and better over time.
Right. It's all about making the right decision at the beginning to set it down the right path. And so many times that happens where the wrong decision is made, and you wind up having to pay for it so many times as it moves down the path. And talking about this, we have not actually had a chatbot company on in a long time, but I keep thinking here that your platform is just prime for communication with the carriers to allow maybe question and answering, to allow it to go to a direct path. Is that something on your roadmap now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there's already some really good solutions out there. So, I mean, we definitely don't need to be the end all be it all for everything. I mean, we want to play nicely in the sandbox with all the other technologies. So, we're actively looking at partner opportunities. But if you think about, from a Claimatic perspective, if a carrier's got an FNOL tool and they, their insured fills it out online and then click submit, and then if a little window pops up to say, hey, your claim's been received. Are you open for self-service options? If you're willing to do a little bit of work, we can process this claim even faster. So, if the insured's willing to walk around their house and take pictures of the damage and things of that nature and submit it all through the app, well, that saves us from obviously having to deploy an IA out to the house. And so, but if they're not comfortable with self-service, then you've got to have an alternate path, right? So if the insured says, no, I don't want it, I want somebody out here to come do it for me, well, then that kicks it down a separate logical chain. But yeah, you can absolutely, immediately engage. Once you get the FNOL, you can immediately engage like the tools like ZipWhip or Hi Marley to start immediately communicating with the insured. You can have the chatbot thing for certain types of claims to just, walk them through a logical progression of questions. There's just a lot of different ways that you can reimagine the claims process once you start to bring some of these technologies to bear, and especially when you bring them together in force.
Very interesting. So obviously this is a tool that answers a lot of questions. What drew you to come to work here? You have an interesting and varied background. What brought you to Claimatic?
That's an interesting story in and of itself. So I was part of the ownership team. We sold LWG Consulting to a private equity company in 2014, and it was perfect timing for me, just really from a personal perspective, because my son was 2, and I was on the road all the time, and a lot of international travel. And so the sale of our company really allowed me to come off the road. And so the last several years, I just focused on being a good dad, and so just poured into his development. And so, but now he's 7 and he's in 2nd grade. And so with him being back in school, I've got some time back in my day. And so I was doing some project work, really, pretty consistently from the time that we sold on, just because I got phone calls from competitors and carriers and private equity firms and research firms and whatnot. And so I was looking for something that I thought would, be fun and engaging and get me kind of more back in the insurance business. And we had some interesting conversations with Claimatic. And so we did a pretty extensive due diligence process on each other. And just, what I saw from the outside looking in is it's a technology, and especially obviously I know claims really well, but it's a technology that improves the claims process that, is a bit of a game changer as far as, what's being done currently today, and the opportunity to, re-engage in the insurance business and is still, not have to travel like a maniac, because I'm still a, football coach and basketball coach and baseball coach and golf coach and everything else. Really checked all the boxes. And so, I think from an entrepreneur's perspective, we love the opportunity to solve problems, and we like to build things from scratch. And so to come in at a very early stage with this company that's still really in startup mode, and help it to grow and develop, for me, just seemed like a whole lot of fun.
While you were saying that, it made me start to think about strategic partners. And you were saying earlier how you want to play nice in the sandbox. Is that kind of a mission behind Claimatic, is to be able to not be everything to everybody, but to be able to bring on those strategic partners?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So it comes down to a fundamental, essentially business decision early on. So I think there's certain companies that want to go out and be the everything to everybody, and they want to be the dominant player, and they want to be they want to develop a monopolistic power in the market, which is all wonderful from a profits perspective and market share and everything else. But I think what you see when you look at companies like that versus companies that want to build out a better ecosystem, by far the ecosystem companies are almost always more successful. And so
Yeah.
I would say that from a long-term play, the better bet is to bet on the ecosystem. And so that's part of the the value proposition behind us is, we already recognize that we're integrated to Guidewire and Duck Creek and Salesforce and whatnot, and some other homegrown systems. We're never going to replace the claims management system. We don't want to have to deal with payments or all these other things, that we don't want to be the system of record where you got to keep all the information. We do what we do really, really well. We've got a couple of other tools in development that'll speed up other parts of the claims process. But no, we want to, again, we have the API structure where we really want to allow the carrier to, I think what you're going to see long term is carriers are going to essentially build their own Lego set of claims management systems tools. And so if they really like Frisk, then that's great. Let's bring in Frisk. If they really like Shift, let's bring in Shift. If they really like XYZ tool that does some other thing. But what you also have to think about from a carrier perspective is you've got to have a way to manage all of these new tools and functionality that's available in these little slivers. And it can't be a 12 or 18 month, let's review it, let's do a proof of concept, let's, test it and pilot it. So I think at some point you're going to see a better ecosystem where you can test a lot of these little things in real time, off to the side in a sandbox or some inside environment, see how they perform. And then if you like how they perform, on some test data, then you can incorporate them into your system. And I think you'll see some more logical execution of how do we make those kind of decisions. So we like the idea of being sort of that central hub where some of those decision opportunities can play. And so if we allow ourselves to plug into 350 or 3,000 different little InsureTech companies that are out there that provide different pieces of functionality, and then the carrier can mix and match depending on how they want to build out their system, then we think that that's a great option.
Do you integrate with any of the estimating platforms right now?
Yes and no, right? So currently today, what happens is, a claim is in Guidewire and it gets sent to Xactimate or Symbility. but it's a decision process that gets kicked off from Guidewire. Again, whatever the basic platform is. Again, we don't want to be the system of record, so something's got to be holding the information regarding all the different transitory pieces. If we plug into their CMS, we say, hey, automatically kick this to these 4 resources, and part of that is obviously the estimating piece, then the Guidewire to Xactimate connection or the Guidewire to Symbility connection, I think is sufficient. If at some point it makes sense to directly connect, then that would be, I think obviously we'd be open to that, but again, we don't want to get into competition with, kind of the Guidewires or the SORs that are out there, because that's really not what we believe to be our value prop.
Hey, Tim, you said that you have a couple of things coming up in the not too distant future. Can you share those with us?
Sure. Yeah, we've got a webinar on March 2nd with PC360 that we're hosting on basically claims automation implementation strategies. And so Jackie Turpak with Erie and Tori Santos with USA and Darren McCarthy with Hippo are all going to be panel members. And so we're going to talk about many of the same things that we're talking about on this podcast, but we'd love for you to join us.
Yeah, that sounds great. How would somebody sign up for that?
You can go to our website. We've got it actually is a pop-up when you first log into Claimatic.com, or you'll obviously see the announcements in PC360 stuff as well.
Tim, as we come to a close, like I said, you're a really interesting guy. You're an author. You've been an educator and a trainer, but I've noticed that you were in Mexico. What took you there? What's that about?
When I was working for Rimkus Consulting Group down in McAllen, we were dealing with mold claims back in 2000, 2001, as you guys are, well remember, and we were just swamped with work. But, once I figured out the Rimkus business model, and I said, man, if we have all these issues with, people getting hurt and claims being made, I said, and we were in McAllen, right? So we're, taking adjusters across the border to have dinner and things of that nature, pretty routinely. And so I said, well, if there's all this work in Texas and in the U.S., isn't there probably a greater amount of work in Mexico? Because we all know that the design standards and OSHA and things of that nature really don't, apply in the same form or fashion. And so I just kind of got that bug in my ear that, hey, that'd be really kind of a cool thing to go explore. And so it was literally drive across the border, go talk to some insurance people in Reynosa. They said, well, all the decisions are made in Monterrey. And so I said, okay. So I went to Monterrey. And I don't even know how I got some of the meetings I got now, because this is way before the internet was really good, and there was LinkedIn wasn't even around yet. But I was able to get a meeting with this in-house attorney for the second largest insurance company down there, and I was trying to explain to him in broken Spanish, because I didn't speak it very well back then, what we did. And so he's like trying to listen. He's being very polite, and then he finally says, "So you do forensics?" And he asked me this in Spanish, and I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, hold on a minute." So he goes back in his office. He comes out with his file, and he starts showing me these pictures of this dead lady. And he said, so here's the story. This guy divorced his wife, married a secretary, bought a $2.5 million life insurance policy on her. 10 days later, she slips and falls and dies in the bathroom. We're on the hook for the $2.5 million. The medical examiner's reports as the cause of death is undetermined, but obviously we're suspicious. And I said, well, yeah, I would be too. And we all, obviously all of us from a claims background, we all know that, anywhere between, 10 and 20% of all claims have some fraud element to them. And he said, well, can you help? And I said, interestingly enough, I said, we just hired a guy from Puerto Rico that's, fluent in Spanish, and he's a biomechanical engineer, and he taught at Tulane University. I said, so, normally what we do is a lot of vehicle accident reconstruction and construction injury claims and things of that nature, when people sometimes exaggerate injuries. And so we have to bring some of that to bear. But I said, yeah, I think you could probably help in this case. He said, okay, well, I'm going to assign you the file. So take the file back. We fly back to Monterey. We map the condo in the bathroom, take a bunch of pictures, and we start lining up all the marks on her body with the autopsy report and the physical evidence. And basically, we determined that he beat her to death in the bathroom. So we wrote a report to that effect. Fast forward a few months, we testify in Mexican court. And then in Mexico, there's no jury. It's only a judge. The judge agrees with us. And so the civil case ends in a victory for the insurance companies, which they were obviously ecstatic about. And so then we were heroes by default. Well, then the governor of Nuevo Leon, which is the state around Monterey, as soon as the civil case was over, he reopened the criminal investigation into the guy and took him to jail. And so this blew up Monterey. I mean, it made all the newspapers. And just like in the U.S., the insurance world is very, very small. And so I go to Mexico City a few months later for my first ever trip. It was like June of 2005. And I'm introducing myself to all these home offices of these different carriers down there. And I'm already famous without even knowing it. They're like, oh, you're that guy from that life insurance case. And I'm like, well, yeah, that was us. And so it was the funniest thing. Well, then I got lucky. I always say that obviously when you work really, really hard, timing is everything, but you get lucky along the way. So Hurricane Wilma hits Cancun in October of that year. And so the SVP of property claims for the second largest carrier again calls me up and says, "Hey, Tim, what do you know about segregating pre-existing damage from hurricane damage?" And I said, "I know a lot about that." He said, "Well, come on down to Cancun." So we spent 8 months in Cancun doing cat duty. And those two projects for me solidified that there was a really good opportunity down in Mexico. They had a need for really good expertise. And what we found out as we further developed that market is the local forensic engineering expertise was pretty poor. There's obviously some issues with graft and corruption and things of that nature. And so for me, I got the idea in my head. I was like, I can go build an international forensic engineering business based in Mexico City that serves all Latin America. We can take the high road. We can play it the right way. We can charge U.S. rates. We can be the go-to guys for New York and London and Germany when they have these large losses that go on in Latin America. And so that became my mission in life. And so I recruited some guys that wanted to live that dream with me. We went down there and we built the company and grew it to a multi-million-dollar business. And we got to travel all over Latin America, looking at all sorts of crazy claims. And it was just so much fun to take those guys and develop them and make them way more successful than any of us had ever been in McAllen, Texas. And so, yeah, that was what took me down to Mexico.
Well, listen, we really appreciate you being with us today. Loved hearing about Claimatic. We've heard about it. We appreciate you giving us more about it and pulling back the curtain. And we totally agree. I mean, Lee and I have spoken in the past in conversation about the need for a tool like what you guys have. So I think it certainly seems like you're in the right place at the right time. And we wish you all the luck and all the best.
I appreciate you guys and look forward to meeting y'all in person and getting to shake a hand.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Hey, Lee, you know how we've talked before, especially you have talked before about there's a particular tool that needs to be formed for all these different tools that are out there to all funnel into one spot. Sounds like they agreed and they put that together.
Yeah, I think that they're at least getting the beginning of it, right? The starting point. And it is so important to make that decision at the very beginning and to make it right. I mean, so much money and time is wasted if the wrong claim goes to the wrong hand. So I think that they have a great future. It seems like they've got a lot of good people working on this product, and it's a very exciting thing.
What advice would you give them if you had that opportunity?
That's a good question, Rob. I think a lot of times companies go into their products and they're very stuck in their ways and they know exactly what needs to be done. But my advice would be to be open-minded, to change if need be, pivot if need be, and it sounds like they are. It sounds like they're very open-minded, and I think that it's going to be very successful because, like I said, if there's one thing about claims, they all have to go somewhere. And so if you're going to design a software that has to deal with anything, well, 100% of claims need to go somewhere. So let's work on the dispatch. I think that's a great business model.
Well, we really appreciate Tim for reaching out to us and telling us about Claimatic, and we look forward to hearing more about him. And as always, we thank you for being with us. So we'll say what we say all the time, whether you want us to or not.
Goodbye, everybody.